We are at the Moen Manga studio. In a room filled with demon posters, a man apologizes to his colleagues, mentioning he did not heed their suggestions. Because of this, the studio went bankrupt and his colleagues listened to his apologies on a call. The man was attached to equipment that kept him alive, saying he would not last much longer. He says he was happy to create so many stories with his colleagues. The call ends and the man bids them farewell. The author places his hand over his works, recognizing that in the end his characters were the only ones by his side. The sensation of his death begins to take over the protagonist and he feels somewhat comfortable. At that moment, the protagonist feels his mind becoming clearer while being cared for by a girl. He opens his eyes with great effort. Upon facing the girl and asking who she was, the girl is surprised by the protagonist. The girl drops the bucket of water and stumbles, falling to the floor. Our protagonist gets up and asks why he was there. Then the girl runs off, calling her mother and warning that he had woken up. Unable to say anything, he just watches the girl leave the room. After much effort, he manages to sit up, placing his feet on the floor. The man wonders if he did not die and imagines he might have been transmigrated. Observing the room, the man finds some clothes hanging. With great effort, he manages to dress and recognizes that although his body is weak, at least he can recover. At that moment, someone comes knocking on the door. A woman bursts open the door, calling the protagonist's master. Our protagonist is impressed to see the girl. He calls the girl in the blue dress in front of him, singing. The woman throws herself on the protagonist, saying she had been waiting for more than half a year for his awakening. The master wonders why one of his characters was there hugging him, but soon he notices the softness of her body and gets excited. With that, he holds her arm to push her away. Sinine moves away with his motion and apologizes for it. She kneels and says she had forgotten her manners and explains she could not believe it when Young told her about the master. Our protagonist notices she calls him master and is confused, but he can only stare at the girl, unable to say anything. The one holds his arm and says the others would be happy to see him, and the master wonders who the others might be. Gradually, she begins to introduce the inn they were at and says everyone was there. In another room, someone was pouring wine into a glass. Sinine recognizes him and calls for Ming to inform him that the master had woken up. Again, the protagonist is impressed with the person in front of him. For Ming was a demon man with pointed ears. The master recognizes that he was the vampire Ming, and the girl scolds him for not creating his master. Ming is uncomfortable with her attitude, but he approaches and greets his master without changing his expression. The girl asks the master to ignore him because he was in a bad mood and pulls him to meet the others. At this, the master begins to recognize that they were all characters from his manga. Soon after, the dwarf Susan and the lumberjack Fan Lei come to greet him, and he notices he was not the only one to go to that world. More people appear and say they could have an early lunch that day. They were the Zami Liang Cheng along with the blind Bai, and the master recognizes they were those who were with him at his death. Our protagonist recognizes that the characters he and his colleagues had created were there. All of them were known as the Demon Kings. The master remembers his past life as the cartoonist Jing Fan who died from a disease. But you revive being sent to a world inhabited by the characters from his stories. Sinine makes a toast to everyone celebrating the master's awakening. She mentions they would have a foundation from now on, but the master imagines it was just interpretation and asks if during the 6 months he was asleep they stayed there. Everyone is impressed with his comment. Bai responds that it was not only the master who suffered something since he was in a coma, for they all became normal people. Jen wonders if it would be a problem for the Demon Kings to become normal people and live in an inn near the city, besides wondering why they insist on calling him master. But he understands he cannot lead them to glory and asks where Mo Wan was. Sinine gets worried and asks for a moment as she rises from the table. He watches Sinine leave and remembers that both she and Bai were creations of his friends and he just helped. However, Mo Wan was a complete creation of his and imagines he can relax a bit if he sees him. But the demon woman returns with the box and a serious expression mentioning that Mo Wan was there in that box. Upon opening the box, she shows a stone and says that Mo Wan kept saying he did not need to eat or drink. After a while, he sealed himself in that stone. The master decides to relax after the meal and looks at Mo Wan's stone, wondering why his creation does not come out of that stone. But the stone does not react to his comments. Our protagonist recognizes that beings like them would never humble themselves before him. With it, he returns the stone to its place and believes the others were only showing a superficial face of themselves. Suddenly, you hear someone complaining because someone would not let Sinine bandage his hand. Ming had cut his hand with shards and says he is a vampire, while family praises that they no longer have their powers. But the vampire claims his recovery was still faster than humans. Fan Lai just accepts and says he will take the alcohol to the people, leaving Ming to take care of the broken container alone. Someone approaches him and asks if he was busy. Ming turns and sees the master staring at him at the door, asking if he would like to talk. Zheng asks if he would not sit at the table, and Ming says it is disgusting. The master starts a series of questions about the place, while Ming says he does not know how to answer and mentions that Bai might be able to. He says the residents were strange for not having tried to inform themselves and mentions that this is the basics of games. But the vampire responds that they didn't need to be informed since he was in a coma, while Zheng imagines that he's shifting the blame onto the master. At this, Ming says that he didn't need to worry about the residents, which surprises the master. The vampire explained that they thought a lot of the master, but they decided on their own not to abandon him during the coma, and even less now that he is awakened. Jane's impressed by his comment and believes it would be touching if it were said by Sinying instead of Ming. He adds that everyone else abandoned them except the master, and that's why they would do the same for him. As he leaves, he mentions that they were waiting for his return, and that Bai should have some notion of the surroundings. With that, Ming goes on his way, leaving the master seated at the table alone. Jane imagines it as if they knew they were characters in a work and thus recognized him as their master. But Yu believes he should at least thank them. At that moment, Ming notices something strange and realizes that his hand is healed. In a room, Susan tells a story of Brother Hu fusing his fighting spirit into a horse and killing 3,000 people on the battlefield. All the spectators are impressed by his story. The master remembers that Susan used to interrupt people and wonders how his readers would react to that. Looking to the side, he recalls that Sinny always opened a brothel in his stories, regardless of the time where you're in the world. He remembers seeing this in several stories and imagines if the literary level was declining a lot, then he wonders if that was a normal world. Bai mentions that there are many separatist regimes in that world, though none are really stable. He adds that everyone he met were normal people. At this, a man appears riding a blue horse with feather-like forms on its legs and face. This makes the master ask if Bai thought that was something simple for a world. But he provokes the master by reminding him that he was blind. At night, all the residents gather in front of the master. Jenny explains that Bai have talked about that world and asks if any of them could say anything more. Stinning says that it didn't matter because they just wanted to know his decision. She explains that they decided to name the inn only when you woke up. Until then, they called the inn Tong Fu Ba Longmen in reference to the master. The protagonist imagines that even after dying, he would have to decide something like this until he decides that the second name seemed better. But his ally says he didn't even think about it, and the master says it wasn't worth it. He recalls that he liked scary things in his past life, but now he thinks it's a joke for understanding the feeling of being a creation. So he recognizes that in this world, what worries him were his characters and decides to do something that interests him more. The master returns Mo Wang's stone to its place and remembers that the game ends when one stops playing, but he believes he will have no regrets if he is the player himself. Jane gives orders to Xusan and Fan Lai to get more information and find a place for them. Bai mentions that the patrol captain's wife was suffering from infertility and would send a water charm to her, that he sends Sinin to receive their guests during the night. The blind man commands Liang Chen and Armain to help Sinin, so that no one causes trouble because it was the first time for her and the master. The demon woman accepts the orders and says she will charge the guests a considerable price. Our protagonist recognizes that they really organized themselves during those 6 months despite just waiting for him. Sinin asks if the food was not to the vampire's liking. Ming says that you really didn't like the food. At nightfall, the master receives information about the progress of their missions. He asks if he can help with anything, and the vampire says he has already helped a lot, which leaves the master irritated, understanding that he would be helping by doing nothing. At this, Ming says that although the auditions are over, the value of the other festivities would be very high. A pair of people approach the inn and say that although they caused many problems, there never came to settle accounts. The master believes it will be best to give up attending to them, and the vampire mentions that it would not be that simple, because the strength of their followers was very great and Sinin had already accepted the money even though she couldn't sleep with it. Ming adds that the master can help if he wants. Liang Cheng waits in front of a staircase serving as security. When he sees the master approaching, he asks who sent him there, and Zhang says it was of his own volition. He mentions that you will run after breaking a vase and wonders if everyone thinks he is dead weight. The zombie says he can do whatever he thinks is best and doesn't need to force himself to do something he doesn't want to. But he adds that the master's safety is his priority. With that, Zhang knows that he cared about his master. Meanwhile, the guest tries to approach Sinying, and she tries to keep him occupied. Ming stares at his hand with a stake in it, until he pierces his hand that was cut in the morning. And with that, he licks the blood from his hands while getting excited with the sensation. Sinying adjusts her stockings and extends her feet to seduce the guest. She asks if she looked good in those clothes, which excites her guest. The man stares at her excitedly, saying he has never seen anything so beautiful in his life. Then she tries to stall a little more, saying she still had more to show, which makes him even more excited. Sinying throws herself on the bed and says she could show more if she wanted, and her guest watches her more and more excited. He says he wants, while the girl wraps her arms around his neck. Then she says she will show him everything, until she gets close to his ear and asks him to wait a bit. More and more, she changes her clothes to make the guest more excited. At that moment, the guest's security notices someone approaching and asks what they want. Lian explains that the master brought a famous city wine, and the security says he is not interested. But the zombie says they were ordered to deliver the wine, not to force them to drink it. So the security stares at the protagonist holding a wine vase. At that moment, he tells the two to enter, and Zhang thanks him. Our protagonist passes in front of the security while observing the wine vase. Meanwhile, Stinian adjusts her stockings again. The guest keeps asking her to take off her stockings, and she tries to stall, asking him not to rush while removing them slowly. Cindy wraps her stocking around the man's neck and pulls him close with her stocking, saying she'll give him whatever he wanted. At that moment, she notices something, and the master recognizes that it was the right moment. Jang strikes the base on the guard's head with great force while trying to knock him down. Meanwhile, Cindy tightens her stocking around the man's neck and starts to strangle him. The door bursts open and Ming appears like a shadow, following a hairpin. With the hairpin in hand, the vampire strikes the guest's neck. With that, he collapses unconscious while Ming watches him. The girl asked if he was still alive while recovering from her efforts, but Ming says he took some precautions. However, the guard survived the master's attack and charges at him, drawing his sword. Jang worries as he sees his enemy approaching him. Liang prepares to help his master and pulls a hidden weapon from his sleeve to strike him from behind. When the swordsman tries to hit the master, a blue flame starts to cover him. Our protagonist is impressed by what happens next. At that moment, the zombie gets hit by the swordsman's attack. Despite this, he manages to land a direct hit on the swordsman and presses harder to cause more damage. It ends up with both being pierced by the attacks. The swordsman recognizes that his opponent was undead. When Liang was about to complete his attack, the guard released a blue light. Shane wonders what that light was and imagines if it was the swordsman's internal energy or his Kai. He notes that this time he found something quite valuable. His enemy stands firm, and the master imagines that he was ready to fight. At that moment, the swordsman realizes that his partner might be in danger. Upon entering the room, the swordsman opens his eyes. The purple aura appears in front of him and Ming rushes towards him. The swordsman prepares to face the vampire. Our protagonist already foresees the danger and tries to warn Ming about the swordsman's direct strike. Ming ends up being pierced and pushed back by his attack. The swordsman demands they reveal who sent them to attack, questioning who they are. But this excites Ming even more, who starts to laugh insanely. Zhang watches the scene and notices that Ming is becoming increasingly insane. The vampire opens his mouth and his fangs appear. With that, he bites the swordsman's neck forcefully, causing the swordsman to scream loudly while trying to keep the sword steady, until the swordsman finally loses consciousness. Ming releases his victim and lets him fall to the ground while blood drips from the bite. The swordsman falls to the ground, hitting his head hard while Ming displays his strong blue aura. He recognizes that sensation and becomes even more excited. With that, a pair of huge wings appear on his back while his body emits intense energy. Xindian and Liang get excited about their partner's powers returning, while the master is impressed. With that, they believe they might recover the powers too. The partner comments on how convenient vampire bodies are for being able to recover. She starts to question Ming about the return of his powers and if he knows how he recovered. Ming explains that it was because of the master's awakening, which excites Xindian, who looks at the master with a hungry gaze. Because this makes her believe she could recover her powers too, and Zhang watches her worried, wondering what she wants to do. But she changes the subject, saying she would take him to a place to rest. She asks him to leave the rest of them while looking at him more gently. Liang questions if Ming would recover better sleeping in a coffin, and he says that life needs a sense of ritual. The zombie responds that he prefers to sleep in his bed. Ming says that he rarely slept in a coffin before and only started doing it because he thought he was becoming human. Liang says that he was no longer a normal person. A voice emerges asking if they almost had an accident. Bai was observing them and says he was mistaken. Ming responds that it was his mistake, though it doesn't matter, because he believes that only this kind of world could bring them some pleasure. The blind demon acknowledges that the initial vision of the world was a success and says he will interrogate the guest. But Ming says to let Jane interrogate him, which impresses his partners at his request. Bai believes that the master wouldn't do that, and that when the master needs to, he will ask him for help. The vampire reminds that procedures must be followed, and Bai questions if that was the reason Ming recovered his powers. His blind partner says that despite agreeing to act discreetly, he secretly worked on this while leaving the room. Liang starts to question and provoke Ming, while they both agree that they cannot abandon the master. Ming believes that his distinguishing feature is having told the master that he wouldn't abandon him, and perhaps his recovery has to do with the master. Since they arrived in that world, they accepted him as the master, and his awakening started a relationship that depends on his trust. With that, Liang and Ming continue discussing the master until Ming asks to close the coffin, and Liang leaves. Jake is in the bath, remembering that he didn't feel guilty about the guard's death, and Bai asks him to interrogate his guest. But the master prefers that he does it and then just tells him the results. The blind man accepts the request, and Susan says he could break a few of his teeth if the master wants. Our protagonist imagined that regardless of their actions, that was what he considered right. Or maybe that would just be part of his nature. After 3 hours relaxing without any news, the master gets out of his bath and realizes he fell asleep. At that moment, Liang appears behind him, and Jane is startled by his ally. Upon recovering, the master asks if the interrogation is over, and Liang says it is not. The two talk, and the master asks what he wanted. The zombie just stares at him without any response, making Jing sigh. Our protagonist asks him to tell him anything that worries him, because even if he can't do anything, he could at least be a listener if needed, and Liang puts his hand on the master's shoulder. The zombie asks the master not to take the lead next time. Despite not understanding why he was talking about it, the master decides to accept his request and says he trusts all of them. Jane says he will check the interrogation and that he could do what he wants. Then he leaves the room, leaving Liang there. After standing still for a while, Liang starts to feel his legs giving way until he falls to the ground, sitting and feeling embarrassed for what he did. At that moment, energy starts to emerge from his wound. During an outdoor lunch, Bai comments to the master that this world is different, and that makes it more interesting. He asks the master not to worry because he intends to explain it simply. His aim was in a city called Hutu within a province known as the Yan Kingdom in Baifeng County. Besides this county, there are 6 others, and the capital was in Taichin County, where Baifeng is on the northern front line. 100 years ago in this region, there was a war between the Yan and the desert bandits involving over 10,000 people. On one hand, the war happened because of the bandits' division, and on the other hand, it was the southern Yan's fault. Additionally, 3 nearby kingdoms were observing, which made the Yan focus on their central lands. Thus, the world was dominated by 4 kingdoms with a few exceptions of some small countries. The master listens to the story and notes that this is important information, and the blind man says there is one more interesting thing. Bai says that this world has 9 levels of power, with 1 being the highest, and explains that the guard from that night doesn't even make it onto this list. Our protagonist imagines that this seemed poorly written, but recognizes that he got excited after witnessing that. They discuss recovering their position, and Zheng understands that for this, they need to take someone out of power. Zheng gets excited and asks his blind ally to explain his plan in detail. The first phase of the plan would be to deliver their forces to the center of Hutua City. After explaining the second part, Bai asks the master to review his plan. Our protagonist praises Bai and his plan, which makes him acknowledge the intelligence of his master. This makes Zheng feel discouraged with so much praise. He asks to be called if he can help with anything, and Bai explains that the subordinates only need his trust. This makes the master even more disheartened. With that, the two begin to discuss how much he trusts his allies, until Bai uses his powers to pick up the leaf from the master's cup. He feds the master's trust while eating the leaf. This moment makes the master believe he should keep a certain distance from him, because he observes Bai and notices an intense aura around him. In the afternoon of that day, the master is walking through the inn until he hears noises coming from one of the rooms. The master becomes worried and goes to check what was happening and finds Susan adjusting a model of the region. Cheng asks if that was a topographic map and catches the dwarf's attention. Susan acknowledges the master's intelligence and explains that Bai had asked for help, and he had the idea of using the map for future strategies. Our protagonist approaches and hands the hammer to him to continue his work. With that, the master touches his shoulder and asks him to continue his work while he goes to check other places. When the master leaves the room, the dwarf hits his head on the map and ends up having a coughing fit. Because of this, Susan slips and loses his balance. But as he's about to hit his back on the floor, he manages to avoid it by lifting himself with his finger, completely excited. The master recognizes that his allies have become strange after the previous night and imagines he needs to know how to deal with them. With that, he approaches a room until he hears a loud, hysterical laugh from Susan that worries him. Because of this, the master trips over the entrance and loses his balance, falling face first into Sining's breasts, making her ask if the master is okay. The protagonist gets up abruptly, completely blushing, staring at her breasts, and she says she was there to deliver his clothes. She completes by saying that she spent 6 months making various clothes for him, and Sining notes that they still fit him. The master says he lost his parents as a child, so he hadn't had anyone make clothes for him for years. Sining takes the master's hand and places it on her chest, saying that she can act as his mother if that pleases him. She says he can do whatever he wants with this mother because she's great at acting. With that, he recognizes that compared to all of his allies, he's by far the purest. At that moment, Bai enters the room, interrupting their conversation, which irritates Sining, who yells at him for not knocking before entering. She thinks about the great atmosphere they had, and that it was ruined by the blind man. Trying to provoke her, Bai knocks on the open door while saying something was happening at the inn's entrance. An army commander says he is going to war, and the empire demands that the Zheng family help transport supplies. The commander already shows low patience, telling them not to even think of excuses because his sword doesn't recognize people. Sining explains that Lai had fought with the merchants, and that Ming was sick and asked what could happen if he infected the tents with tuberculosis. With that, the commander stands up and says to ignore them while Liang and Susan are to be recruited. He demands that the two report to the tents outside the city the next day, where he leaves being greeted by Sining. Our protagonist recognizes that this indeed would be a problem, and Bai appears, saying they have 2 choices. One of them would be to gather their things and leave Fuchu during the night, and the master asks what the other would be. The master's allies look at him seriously, considering these options. Zheng recognizes that the inn have been part of their work for almost a year, and the city is important for their plans. But he knows it wouldn't be wise to raise a flag and rebel against the empire, which makes Bai acknowledge his thinking. With that, Bai asks for Susan's help because he could be good support. Sining asks why she can't go too to help them, and Bai questions if she would prostitute herself for the soldiers. which irritates her, while the blind man explains that they are the master's subordinates and must remove his obstacles. Shusan says that the master can count on them despite understanding that Jane doesn't want them to see him as incapable, because he will place himself in a higher position and understand more than they do. At dawn the next day in the army tents, our protagonist says he was just asked to march with the army and thinks about having been reincarnated and going to war. Liang says there is a problem, and the master asks what he noticed. The zombie mentions that there were no soldiers protecting them and recalls that the orders were for them to transport supplies. He says everything about the soldiers' actions was unknown, even though they were about to go to the battlefield. Jin becomes worried, and with that, the dwarf appears in his tent, saying he discovered a problem. Seeing the emergency rations wagon, he discovered it was full of stones. Several days pass since they arrive at the camps, and the demons anticipate that something will happen that night. Lane asks about the tent's location, and the master imagines they should keep an eye on the water supply. Besides that, he believes that if they camp in a canyon, they could protect themselves better by reducing the protection areas. The zombie praises the master, and this makes him think that he is not a good example because he only knows how to praise any decision he makes. But he knows there must be more things he would have to say. Liang says they have a little over 200 cavalry members, most of whom are forced recruits. He explains that if the enemies made a stealth attack, the soldiers would have no confidence and the camp would be destroyed. The explanation continues, warning that the cavalry seem more focused on the tents, and the master understands that they were bait. Our protagonist realized he couldn't warn his superiors and decides to just focus on protecting himself. He says he wouldn't mind getting some benefits if the conditions permit. That night, a soldier was tired of the watch duty, until a barbarian appears behind him and cuts the man, get rid of him. Then another barbarian appears and they enter the tents while ketchup stains mark the tents. They continue following their plan and move to the next tents until they reach the master's tent. Lane grabs the barbarian's neck and gets rid of his aggressor. His shout draws the attention of the other nearby barbarians, and Susan catches them off guard, taking them out as well. With that, Liang gets rid of his attacker's body while the master observes his allies and orders them to cut off their heads. At that moment, an energy-charged arrow flies over the camp, and an army of barbarians appears, riding in for the attack while they remember that Bai explained who they were. Jet explains that these barbarians have been rivals of the Yan Kingdom for hundreds of years and were not the type to yield. As they arrive at the camp, the barbarians begin a massacre while the master's group hides to protect themselves. He recognizes that they were just bait and that the army should soon arrive to help. Susan asks why he don't take advantage of the chaos to escape, and the master remembers that killing the barbarians could earn them merits. With that, the dwarf acknowledges that his master can be quite sinister. One of the barbarians finds the master's group hiding and charges at them, making Liang prepare to fight. The dwarf positions himself in front of the master along with the zombie, which provokes the barbarian. In a few seconds, he is defeated by Susan in a quick move while the horse keeps running towards the zombie. At that moment, Liang awakens a power that evokes several energy hands and lands a direct punch on the horse's jaw. With that, the horse is abruptly knocked down and the zombie throws the barbarian to the ground. Liang calls his master, who simply decapitates the barbarian with a sword strike. With that, he dirties his face with blood, which he wipes off, and upon tasting it, he says it is slightly sweet. The blood-stained sword falls to the ground, and the master steps back, realizing what he just did. But he believes the sensation is not so bad after all. Susan offers a drink to the master, saying that getting used to killing for the first time is difficult despite being enjoyable over time. The master takes the water canteen and splashes it on his face while imagining that a wolf would never accept his sheep as a leader. That he cannot change the relationship, then let them believe he has everything under control. With this thought, the master retrieves his sword and manages to recover. The barbarian attack continues until a group appears in the distance. Finally, the kingdom's army was approaching to get rid of their enemies. At that moment, a fierce battle begins between the Yan soldiers and the barbarians. The battle intensifies while the group observes the soldiers' movements. Susan gets irritated with the commander's attitude, while Lian acknowledges that it will be difficult to get cavalry soldiers. A spear approaches the group, and the two notice the incoming attack, managing to save the master's life. The group faces the direction of the spear and sees a barbarian observing them. Lian draws his sword and charges at his enemy, jumping to try to decapitate the barbarian. But he intensifies his aura and withstands Liang's attack with such effort that it causes an energy collision. Our protagonist orders Susan to help his partner while noting his enemy's focus. The zombie retreats after the attack and realizes that his sword was nearly cut by the heat of the aura. With that, the barbarian gets excited seeing the state of his enemy's weapon and charges at Lian. But the zombie dodges the barbarian's blow and says that it's not a problem because he never knew how to use his sword. His enemy takes advantage of the swing that hits the zombie with the tips of his shoulder pad, until he notices that Liang withstood the attack and barely moved. Liang takes advantage of the proximity and lands a direct attack on his enemy's chest. He mentions that he prefers to use his claws to fight while his mask opens its mouth, exhaling energy. An airless fire that hits his wrists, distracting Liang to see who his new enemy is. With that, the barbarian takes the opportunity and kicks his chest. throwing him against the hay cart. The barbarian archer warns his ally, saying there was something wrong with Leon, explaining that despite his arrow skills being able to penetrate an unarmored soldier's arm, he barely hit him. At that moment, the dwarf appears behind him, saying he should worry more about himself. Susan strikes his daggers into the archer's back and in a quick motion pulls him to the ground to finish his enemy. The barbarian swordsman despairs at his partner's death and grabs Liang by the neck to lift him. He raises his sword and threatens to kill the unconscious zombie, but then the master quickly approaches to save his partner. The barbarian notices the master's movement and throws Liang away to try to hit him. Suddenly, the barbarian coughs up blood and imagines he must have been poisoned at some point. Soon he remembers Liang's claw attack and believes it was then that he was poisoned. Jing takes advantage of a moment and kills the other barbarian before driving his sword into the ground. The master tries to stay on his feet after this move and leans on the sword. Liang approaches him, extending his hand to offer help. Jing accepts his help and stands up with great effort. At that moment, Liang remembers a conversation where he heard Bai saying he didn't see the master as someone strong. But he reminds the zombie that Jing was the one who created them. In a comparison of the real world to a cage, the blind man says the master was trapped and shackled in his cage. Bai explains that they just need to give the master possibilities to evolve and lead them. He believes Jing has the potential to be someone they will follow. Liang removes the arrow from his arm and warns that the Yan army was taking control of this situation, and Jing asks to see the results. Jusen appears, dragging an old man who was the head of the barbarians' expansive division, saying he caught a big fish. The dwarf asks if the old man would be worth more to them alive, but the master says he might have seen what happened and orders him to be killed. While the dwarf prepares his dagger at his neck, the old man calls the master a demon. Susan starts laughing and agrees with the old man's statement just before slitting his throat. After the battle, the place was full of bodies on both sides while the surviving cavalry members searched the area, until they find someone in their path and the commander points his sword at this person. It turns out he had found a master's brook who were holding the head of the barbarian chief. The commander stares at the head in Jing's hands and recognizes who that man was. He knew the Central Army was after that man and acknowledges their luck for getting such a great merit. But he does not intend to give them this victory and charges at the trio. Susan notices that their goal was to steal the trio's merits, and the master prepares for combat. With a smile on his face, the commander proceeds until a blade-shaped beam of light crosses the battlefield. This beam of light hits the commander fully and cuts in half. The attack was launched by the 7th Elder Escort on the orders of the Marquis of Zhenbei Li Quan. At that moment, the young Marquis points to the trio and orders them to clean themselves and come to her tent. In the tents, they wonder if they would have something to resolve with the general while mocking her for being a woman posing as a man. Shusan mentions that a woman's status is not so low, and this could be useful to them, as she will be a good partner for the master. But Lane says she is not good enough for him, which makes the dwarf complain about his partner's comment. Lane mentions that beside them, the master can marry the best woman in the world, and asks if he has not noticed something. This makes the dwarf understand the connection between the recovery of their powers and their master. His partner remembers that before the master awakened, they were ordinary people, and that currently even the master is evolving. With it, the dwarf remembers that he told the master the general was a woman, but forgot to mention something. He remembered telling the master not to expect a girl to let him in as he would have a beautiful view. But Lane mentions that if he did, that the general would call her soldiers and they would kill the master, and Susan gets disheartened hearing this. Meanwhile, Jane approaches the general's tent. Upon entering the tent, he kneels to greet the general. Lai Quan says they were of great help to them and allows them to choose between 2 rewards. The first would be to become her personal servant and member of her family, while the other would be to become an officer in the Huchuo area. But staring at Cheng, she says she will take him into the Li family, and before she finishes her sentence, the master chooses the second option. With that, the general gets irritated by the answer and asks if he was belittling her family. Jing says that Huchu was his home, while he imagines it would not be worth it to be taken as the general's servant. For a moment, he remembers Ming's attitude while wondering if any of them would be vegetarians. Meanwhile, the vampire was finishing his mission getting rid of the enemies. He hears that after the hyena gang is done, they would go after the Trinity Union and questions why they were starting the plan without the master. Bai explains that the master should return at any moment, and they were just taking precautions by taking the initiative. Ming removes the weapons embedded in his body and asks about the other gang, saying he does not remember them on the list. His blind partner mentions that he had left that to Sinim to handle, and at that moment they begin to hear screams from the inn. The leader of the cart gang was trapped in several wires that begin to strangle him and hang him in the air. He tries to fight the trap and asks what she had done to them while Sinim watches the scene of her retarded. She begins to savor the water from the teapot while observing them and wonders if the master has already finished his fight. Meanwhile, the master's partner says that they can reach Huchu in a day and that he does not need to worry about the inn. The group is in the middle of the desert making an outdoor fire. Susan says he is worried about his friend Lai and wonders if he managed to eat enough. Ignoring the story's direction, Jing asks them to rest after eating, until they hear the sound of footsteps and the 2 demons notice someone approaching. The group stands up ready for combat while a woman appears asking for shelter and to share the place with them. This woman was a barbarian followed by 2 men and 2 children. The barbarians make a fire keeping separate from them until their leader stands up with a water canteen in her hands. Zheng tries to refuse the drink, saying that the wind was cold and his throat was sore. He does not trust the barbarians after what happened and imagines she should drink first to prove it was not poison. The woman sits down again and introduces herself as the chief of the barbarians, Mortal Ali, while drinking from the canteen. Then she says the children were grandchildren of the Shachu tribe leader, and she traveled all this way from a royal hall to rescue them. Jing prepares his sword and notes that she is an enemy as the Shachu tribe barbarians were lured into the trap by the Li family. Badi stands up and hands the canteen to her partner and asks if they were members of the Li family because of the horses. At that, she acknowledges the Marquis's power, believing they were trying to intercept them. But Jing mentions that there was a misunderstanding in his whole story until the canteen starts to emanate energy when thrown. Soon the barbarians next to the leader begin to suffer the effects of the poison while she uses the curse to manipulate the corpses. With that, the dead barbarians rise, emanating her energy, and stare at the group with a ravenous look and pointed teeth. Jing mentions that he knew something was wrong with her while the trio prepares to face them. But at that moment, the master decides to provoke Liang by saying that they were his relatives and asks if he is not going to say hello. The zombie barbarians charge at the trio to kill them, and Liang removes his mask and shows his teeth. He launches a roar filled with energy at them, and his energy starts to affect the leader's control. Ai recognizes that Liang broke her control and wonders how he managed it. The leader decides to check Liang's story and activates the barbarian Ai's curse. With this, she notices something wrong in Liang as she sees a powerful and intense aura. He was not controlling the barbarian corpses, as they only submitted to the demon's wishes. Liang uses his roar and manages to control the barbarian corpses and makes them attack their leader. Ai dodges the attack from the first barbarian, while the second she counters with a punch and knocks him down. Foreseeing greater dangers, she hugs the children who wake up as Susan appears behind her. When he intends to strike his daggers against the leader, she loses her ability again. Then a quick move, she expels the dwarf away from them while raising her cloak to protect them. Susan tries to see his target covered by the cloak, looking for a gap without any success. Noticing something wrong with that cloak, the dwarf is forced to land and complains, telling her not to run away. But the barbarian leader shows that she did not run away, which surprises the dwarf, who asks if she was not agitated. Then she charges at Jane to get rid of the master while holding the children. Our protagonist did not imagine she would charge at him, which makes it easier for him to get rid of her. Jing tries to land a direct attack against her until the leader throws one of the children in front of the master to distract him. The master faces that move and the child's crying face, and he turns his blade to return the child. However, this allows the leader to grab the blade and use it to point at Jing's neck and starts pressing, trying to cut him. The master recognizes that she has a lot of strength and feels her pressure until the zombies controlled by Liang charge at the woman. As they try to hit her, the leader releases the sword and dodges the attacks, which impresses the master. He looks up and sees the barbarian leader above them, preparing to attack. But Susan tries again to hit her from behind, and this time his attack works, hitting her back with one of the daggers. She tries to get away and kicks the dwarf while fleeing from him. Susan chases her, saying she would not be able to escape. But Liang tells him not to chase her, which impresses him. The zombie reveals that controlling her corpses left him at his limit, and he had no more strength to fight while the corpses dissolve. He adds, asking if he chases her, who will protect the master. The Susan returns to the master's side and starts praising him for being able to predict the barbarian's actions. At that moment, the master questions if the dagger was poisoned, and the dwarf just smiles, calling the master mean. In the middle of the desert, far from the trio, the barbarian still had the dagger in her back and starts feeling unwell from the exhaustion and poison. She says that even though she was poisoned, she still needs to complete the royal family's mission. Someone appears to find the barbarian abandoned and asks what she was doing there. A group of men followed by Fan Li asks where the young master was. Aven shouts at the men, ordering them to bring the troops immediately as the Marquis's men were nearby. The men run off while Fan Li continues to stare at her. He looks at the dagger in her back and recognizes the weapon. The barbarian gets irritated and asks what he's looking at. Then he pulls out his axe and says he is looking at her. Later, at the master's camp, Fan Li joined the group and mentions recognizing Susan's dagger. He explains that the dwarf had been sharpening that dagger for half a year, and the master asks if Fan Li killed the barbarian, while he confirms. Our protagonist starts thinking about the luck he had at the caravan he was following, how to spy, and that he would meet the barbarian on the way. Jed acknowledges that he could not kill the children and would only ask for forgiveness if any generation of demons came for revenge. The giant handsomely leaves Susan and says that they make him very energetic since he himself had been eating them for days. Susan realizes that simple people have a simple lifestyle. At the inn, an envoy from Baifeng County named Xu Wenju was waiting to be received. He asks if they believe that the Marquis and the young lady could have survived. One of the staff mentions that they had sent Zhen, who was recommended by the young lady, But the envoy says that Jing was a commoner and asks if he would dare join a rebellion when the Marquis was in danger. Su Wenshu mentions that if he has the ability to mobilize the troops, then you will recognize his abilities. Upon returning to the inn, the master is startled, because the place was completely empty and he wonders where everyone was. An old man comes running out of the inn and asks if the owner has returned. Jing asks what happened, and the old man asks him to calm down, explaining that Sinying and Bai bought another house. Their explanation was that after getting more money, they want to move to have a bigger garden. They mentioned that an official's salary doubles according to his rank, and they should start by showing sincerity. In their new residence, the group comments about getting rid of the hyena gang that was involved in human trafficking. Ming asks why they ended up with the money that the Three Gods Association gave them. Bai says that since the master does not care about religion, they do not need to either, and Singing remembers that his story was cancelled. Singing says that with business going well, they will not worry about money, and asks if it would not be easy to make money with soap. Then Bai stares at Singing while she drinks sake until someone shouts, announcing that the master has arrived, which excites her. Our protagonist goes to relax in a bath while being attended to by 3 beautiful girls. Meanwhile, the demons gather at the table to eat. Sinead mentions that she prepared his bath, and the others start discussing the provocations he made with the girls. The blind demon mentions that the master can always try the fruits of his team, and that they can give him a chance to choose. But Ming immediately tells him not to extend these ideas too much, because if the master gets sad, he will make Bai regret it. At this moment, Jing arrives and says that since they have already eaten, they could go back to work. Susan starts telling about his adventures and talks about the master foiling the barbarian's plan, which impresses Sinead. While the dwarf continues his story, the master is reading a book and gets disheartened seeing how much they were flattering him. Bai says that his subordinates want to form a bandit group and did not expect the master to gain recognition. Cheng remembers that the blind demon had the power of spiritual detection, which allowed him to perceive that he was almost asleep. He mentions that he will leave the development of the establishment with Bai, and the focus will still be the city of Huchu. Liang says they cannot waste the 300 horses delivered to the city. Bai mentions that this is the most important thing to think about, because even though the army is in the name of the Yan Empire, they are loyal to the master. He mentions that Saner and Ale should be annexed and leaves this mission to Susan and Fan Li. Sining receives the mission to train the new girls and select the best for special training. Liam receives the mission to train with the master while they wait to go to Yemen, and says that he should let the master give him tips. Bai says that he has already given the orders and asks the master to correct what he deems necessary, and he just says that Bai has already said everything he wanted. Then Ming asks what he should do now. The blind demon says that the vampire's mission is the most important and provokes him by saying he had not seen him, so he forgot. He explains that to feed the 300 horses it will require money, and Ming asks what he should do. Bai says that he should get some soap, and Ming is speechless hearing that while staring at the blind demon. After 3 days of training, the master acknowledges that his physical strength was increasing. He asks his zombie partner if he wants to take a bath together, and Liang mentions that he does not like hot water. With that, the master says he will talk to Sinying then. Mei and Sinying, who were approaching, talk about the idea of making money by making soap and perfumes. She mentions that with this, they could either make a lot of money quickly or never make any, until she turns to the training partners and notices that the master was no longer there. Sinying runs off complaining to Ming, saying that she forgot to give the master a massage because of him. As she runs off calling for the master, Ming just watches her incredulously. The 2 demons stare at each other, and Ming asks if his zombie partner's aura has increased, but he responds that it has not, saying that perhaps the problem is themselves. Ming imagines that relying on their own hard work would not be enough, and believes that they need to seek other means to recover their powers while staring at the soap they made. After staring at it for a while, Ming mentions that he had made that soap and Liang could use it. When Liang bends down to pick up the soap, Bai finds them and imagines that they have become very close. The 2 turn to him and ask what he wants, and Bai mentions that they will have a meeting at the pavilion at night. With a notice given, the blind demon continues on his way, saying that they can continue what they were doing, still mentioning that fortunately he is blind, so he saw nothing. Meanwhile, Sinying is massaging the master while complaining about the treatment Liang gave the master during training. She asks if it would be a better way to train, and Zhang mentions that he has no problem training the muscles. His partner questions if it would be a good idea to ask Ming to bite him and turn him into a vampire, which makes him curious about the idea. At the start of the meeting, they mention that the topic is cultivation and ask Liang to comment on the master's cultivation in the past few days. He starts the explanation saying that although the master does not possess combat skills, he has a lot of strength, even considering that it has been less than a month since his awakening, which could hinder his recovery. The blind demon says that he believes there is a relationship between his powers and the master, except that there is a problem with that. His recovered powers cannot be developed in any way, and Sinying asks what he has discovered. His theory said that their powers work like an online game where they are tied to the master's strength without ever being able to surpass his level. Liang imagines that in this theory, the master will be level 1. Ming understands that the master's strength depends on himself, while the demons have their powers limited by the master. Bai confirms the explanations of the 2 partners. But Fan Li wonders if he had cut the master when the limitation had been removed. His comment makes all the demons curious and worried. Liang mentions that they are normal people at the moment and decided to let the master decide his actions, and they would just protect him. But now that they are recovering their powers, they are getting insatiable. With it, he fills everyone's cups with wine and says that he knows it is not the best to say anything and asks them to drink together and promise to completely forget what they just said and any ideas that came to their minds. Everyone agrees and drinks the wine together to seal the promise. Bai reminds them that if the master dies, all the demons will cease to exist, and with that, the only way to increase their powers is to help him. But he acknowledges that their system is not good for the master to evolve, which creates the need for a teacher for him. Sinying asks if the blind demon was calling only them to prevent the master from knowing about the teacher's idea. Ming asks why he did not say any of this before, and Susan complains that he embarrassed everyone. The blind demon says he did not expect Fan Lai to say something like that, and the giant wonders if it was his fault. The next day, Sinying and Fan Lai are observing the scenery in the middle of the mountains. The master's partner says that she asked her maid to tell the master to wait for their return, and asks if Bai is sure the teacher they are expecting would have passed by there. Bai mentions that they talked about it the night before and already found a target, while Susan understands that he had planned all this. The blind demon reminds them that he had spoken about the captain's wife who asked for water to help her fertility. Susan repeats some words pretending to understand exactly what he said. He explains that her maid talked about a captured bandit who was a martial artist about to be taken to the neighboring city. Because he is a martial artist, they believe he will be a good teacher for the master, although he is debilitated. But Bai just gives a long speech praising luck and destiny being on their side for getting a teacher for the master. While Fan Li gazes at the horizon looking for signs of a target, Susan complains to Bai about the speech. At this moment, a horse appears beside them and the master meets his allies. Jing admits he heard Bai's shout and asks if they need to be so anxious. The master imagines that people look to talk to acquaintances to find teachers, while they just rob armed people. Susan thinks of saying something until he is interrupted by the blind demon. Bai explains that his base is spread out and this would make many more people appear. While he tries to explain that they will depend on their strength, Jing just says they decide what to do. The blind demon worries that the master will learn about the limitation he causes in his allies and end up having the same thought as Fan Li. With that, Bai organizes the plan, saying that everyone will get involved in the current plan. At this, his allies realize he treated the master as just another member of the group. Susan warns that he found a group of people eyeing a target, and that this could cause more problems. Bai mentions that they need the master's decision to act, and he replies that it seems difficult to hire a teacher these days. The army of soldiers takes a prisoner in a cage through the mountains. At this, he mentions that the mantis huntsful as Sparrow is behind him and questions if it is better to be the Sparrow. During the night, the soldiers' caravan suffers an enemy attack. Captain Wang Lai says they are soldiers of the Feng Liu and he knows their closeness with the barbarians, and the bandit tells him to release his soldiers. Wang Lai ignores the bandit's advice, who reminds him that his daughter-in-law is pregnant and he should not die for nothing. As the battle intensifies, the bandit tries to save the captain's life. Ding Ru was in prison and wonders why the captain is worried as he could survive. He feels something strange and a loud noise starts to sound, affecting all the enemies. Bai appears on the battlefield using an instrument while wondering where he could find a friend in this world. The bandits charge at him to kill him, and Sinying starts laughing at their AV. She uses her threads to strangle and decapitate the bandits. At the same time, her allies get rid of the other enemies while family takes the prisoner. But meanwhile, the captain is facing the bandit leader who has been severely wounded. The captain's wound causes him to fall to the ground unconscious. After getting rid of the captain, the bandit charges at Bai, who prepares to face him and play his instrument. With it, the bandit simply explodes in front of him. Ding Ru recognizes that the bandit was at the mid-9th rank for having defeated the captain and wonders how Bai killed him so easily. Fan Lai receives Bai's order to leave and he runs off the field carrying a prisoner. The captain uses his last strength to approach Bai and asks him to pass a message to his wife. Bai says he will take care of his wife and that he should not worry. Far from the battlefield, the master tries to see if his allies are returning from their mission. After a while waiting, he's impressed by his shadow emerging from the battle's smoke. Fan Li appears running insanely while carrying the prisoner. Our protagonist turns and orders the giant to place the prisoner on a horse to escape. But the giant just runs past the master and keeps running, making Shang try to ask Fan Lai to wait for him. Upon returning to their base, Bai and Sinying inform that although it took some time to get rid of the enemies, Fan Lai was already carrying the prisoner. Our protagonist remembers to keep asking the giant to release a teacher, while Bai praises him for getting a teacher. However, while he is relieved to have gotten a teacher, Susan says he has bad news. As the giant was very excited when he returned to the city, this ended up making the prisoner faked. Jin cannot believe what he just saw and thinks is just a joke. The next day, the blind demon examines the teacher. When the master asks how his pulse is, Bai informs the master that he was actually a psychiatrist. Jin mentions that maybe that guy will not work because he is not breathing and has no pulse, which makes Bai consider burying him. but he says it would be a waste just to bury him and asks if it would not be good to make fertilizer from him like the previous enemies. The master agrees with the idea and says he does not feel very comfortable with Bai, probably because he is not as strange as he is. At that moment, the prisoner manages to wake up, which makes Bai say he was helped by the heavens. Bai mentions that he needed to negotiate things with the teacher, and the master asks to leave that to his subordinates. With that, the blind demon tries to talk about the teacher's martial skills. He mentions that if the teacher could teach martial arts to the master, it could ensure his safety. The prisoner asks when he agreed to be the master's teacher. Sinian gets irritated and says she has seen many heroes turning into mere cowards after being tortured. Bai reminds her that this prisoner is the master's teacher, and Zheng himself trusted them to convince him to accept the request. He mentions that 2 days ago, Captain Wang Wei's wife gave him money for divination. With that, he says they could go kill his whole family, which leaves Ding Ru worried. But Bai simply says it was just personal business and asks what he has to say. The professor accepts the request while remembering that the captain's daughter-in-law was pregnant and he died trying to save him. Bai tells the master's partner that killing a family would be too severe a punishment and that the master would not agree with it. He asks that Dingru would stay there. If he successfully completes his task, they would compensate him, giving him the possibility to recover his cultivation from before he was injured, and the professor believes to be a lie. The blind demon says they tend to be very generous with their allies. Bai promises that the day the master starts cultivation, he will recover and could take revenge on the Fengli family. He also mentions that he can establish a good relationship with the master, and with that, the demons could help him in his revenge. As they move away from the professor, Bai tells Sinian that they should try to convince people with kindness and not with torture. She replies that he has said that before. Still, she reprimands Bai, asking how he dares to threaten Wang Li's family just to convince him. But Bai asks if it wasn't appropriate to threaten Wang Li's family after he died protecting Dingru. Sinian gives a sadistic smile while acknowledging that it was indeed appropriate. She asks if this threat included the child that his daughter-in-law was expecting. The blind demon replies that the child is not his, and Sinian teases him, asking if he was infertile. Then he explains that the most he did was make her drink a water charm to regulate her emotions, and with that, she managed to get pregnant. Sinian feels relieved, saying she imagined he would still leave a child, and he replies that he's pure and kind while she's dirty and evil. Bai asks her to call Ming over there, because he needed to ask him to map the professor's energy circulation, and Sinian warns that if the needle got stuck in his body, it would hurt. He asks if she could hold back, and she replies no while showing excitement. In the examination room, it is mentioned that each family has its own martial arts method, and they needed to have chai and an empty Konggu. Sinian disperses Konggu over Ming's body, and then she begins to mark lines with her needle. Bai explains that after getting Kai and the Konggu would divide it into 5 directions. The directions will be the limbs and the head, and Ming anticipates that if Sinian is not careful, he will die. Dingru worries about Ming asking if they could just make a drawing, and Bai says it will not be a good enough reference. Bai explains how the process works by instructing to concentrate the body's Kai to accelerate. After a few cycles, the body's functions will accelerate and make the Konggu shine. The professor explains that if it shines, he will have the power of a small army leader, and that it took him 10 years to reach the 9th rank. With that, Bai orders him to follow the map route his body, while Ming remembers that he's a vampire and doesn't know what he was talking about. Bai explains that even without understanding, Ming still knows how to control the blood, and he just needs to accelerate circulation to create K. Ming admits that he couldn't disagree with him and accepts the idea. Dingru tries to warn that he cannot rush and must go slowly because the risks are high. But Ming ignores his warning and starts to charge his energy. The professor is impressed with Ming's power because he was at the mid-9th rank of Kai. Sinian is next in line and evokes a pink energy, which she ends up liking despite Ming teasing her by calling her a young girl. She complains to him, saying she's much better than his red. Bai asks Ming not to dress yet because he wanted to test something, and the vampire asks what difference it makes if he wouldn't be able to see him. He replies that life needs a sense of ceremony. After touching Ming's belly, the vampire Bai evokes a bluish energy and says he'd like the exclusive color of the OBMB. The other demons arrive in the room and see the professor's circulation system, and Bai says they can test it too. Liang shows a purple Kai, and Ming argues with Sinian mentioning the silk scene. Chusei reveals a green Q and is disappointed, hoping to change the color. The master's partner teases him, saying it is a natural color that will help them stay hidden. At that moment, they hear a loud scream. Fan Lai activates his golden key, but the dwarf tells him not to overdo it. Bai says that for now they are stuck at the mid-9th rank, and although it is not difficult for them, they still cannot push themselves, because they still have an invisible barrier that prevents them from evolving further, and they know what they must do next. The mission now is to do whatever it takes to help the master evolve. The next day in the afternoon, they explain to the master how they pass on the martial arts lineage, but he asks what he should have learned. He remembers that the most he heard were theories and saw several lines on Ming's body, and he asks how much they overestimate him. Jane still stares at the professor, imagining that he is just a normal person. Bai asks the professor if there is not external stimulant to help the master have a direction to follow. Ding Ru mentions that many cannot feel the Kai and use washi powder to stimulate the evil Kai, which affects the human body. With that, Bai orders Liang to use his evil Kai to stimulate the master's meridians, and he mentions that it might hurt a bit. Liang uses his Huan concentrated in one finger to stimulate Zheng. Jade acknowledges that he feels sore and numb as his body starts to have his nerves bulge. At that moment, the master feels his energy rising until he starts foaming at the mouth from the effort. The demons worry about this and tell Liang to stop. Ming asks if he ended up poisoning the master, and Liang says he knows he couldn't let the corpse poison enter his body. Sinning tries to lift the master while calling out to him without success. She gets angry with Liang and says that Bai ordered him to stimulate him with the evil Qi and not almost cause Alzheimer's to him. Liang says that this would not be possible and he did not inject so much evil Spy into the master, his current strength would not be that terrible. The professor imagines that the master's body had very dense Kai, which acted as fuel being incinerated by evil Kai. Bai believes that then the master's body has a good aptitude for practicing martial arts. With that, they believe it was not a waste of aptitude and that the master could indeed be very powerful. Our protagonist goes back to resting while Bai watches him. When he starts to wake up, Bai asks if he could feel Qi, and he replies that he felt the Kai thick and swollen. Dingru explains that initially the user would only feel the blood as a thread, so him feeling the circulation thick and swollen is a good thing. Bai thinks about praising the master until the demons appear and congratulate him on his extraordinary talent. Everyone is happy not letting Bai praise the master before them, but Jing asks them to speak more quietly. During the night, Bai asks why Su-san went to see the professor. The dwarf says he went to ask for foods that would increase abilities because he believes they might help the master evolve. Bai warns that the consequences of this might be to trap the master at this level, which would also trap them. He also warns that it's better not to try giving drugs to the master, and Su-san says it was just an emergency plan. At this, the blind one acknowledges that they were trying too hard, even though he's not sure when Mo Wang might awaken. Su-san asks what that has to do with Mo Wang. Bai explains that if they keep pushing the master too much, he might end up isolating himself with Mo Wang. But the dwarf says he recognizes that he is very intelligent but doesn't know much about Mo Wang's personality and habits. He asks if Bai knows why Mo Wang didn't remove his own seal, which piques the blind one's curiosity. Su-san's theory is that if Mo Wang awakens, the first thing he would do is kill the master. Then he would question if he deserved to be his father. Meanwhile, Jing is resting in an outdoor bath next to Sinian. She says the best grapes are the small ones with the creamy flavor, while Jing tells her not to say perverted things in the middle of the night. His partner asks if he felt pressured, and he says that although he doesn't feel good with evil Qi, he doesn't feel pressured. Sinian asks if he would like a massage, and he says he will get wet and then rest for the next day's training. With that, she moves away while remembering that the master was a solitary and sensitive author of manhwas, and it hasn't changed. She notes that they might seem very oppressive to the master and wonders if she should tell him. Jane notes how much he struggled to improve his skills and finds it strange that he is the respected master. At this moment, Mo Wang's stone appears in the water, and the master stares at the stone with a light sigh. As Jing gets out of the water, he calls Mo Wang's son and says that the father misses him. At that, the stone starts to shine and emanate an increasingly strong and intense energy. Bai, who was writing something in his room, feels the presence of this energy. He recognizes that this energy belonged to Mo Wang. At the same time, he notices the strong, murderous intent that emanates and wonders if it is against him or the master. The next day, Jing goes to the city and asks how many people returned from their mission, and Sinning mentions that 300 people returned. She explains that with so many losses, Kuchu plans to do something, and the master says they aim to maintain taxes with refugees. Liang says that the magistrate ordered him to appear in court before noon, and the master asks if something is wrong. When he gets there, he receives the merits, and Bai praises him for getting the official position, and they imagine what they could do with it. Bai asks if he was called because of the orphan issue, and the master explains that since there are many, they want to assign them to officials. While making a cigarette, Bai asks him to reconsider the idea of adopting orphans. Although Liang remembers that this wouldn't be his choice and they would be distributed according to influence, Bai says there would be few. The zombie asks how many he would like, and Bai mentions that he would like to adopt all of them, because his plan is to create an orphanage with them, and Liang thinks he's gone mad. But he explains that he wants to cultivate the new generation too. Even if they might get weak orphans, it could be useful to win people's hearts. Jane gets excited and says it's easy to understand when he explains it that way. But he says there's still a lot of work to be done. The professor tells Jane to finish the training that day to not overdo it, while he asks when he will be able to maintain the shine. Ding-Ru warns that there's no need to rush because he should reach half of the 9th grade in 3 days and maybe reach the grade in 2 months. Jane asks his professor to rest early because he plans to return to training the next day. While dressing, the master leaves as the professor acknowledges that his talent, even below the demons, is excellent. He imagines that even though it was called to teach them, it seemed to be nurturing him and wonders which sect it came from. In Master Bai's room, he explains the demons' missions with the products and hiring more people and mentions the results. The master asks if only 3 of them were strong enough, and Bai says he asked them not to act without total certainty. Bai explains that by their speed, they should return with information in about a month. Zheng says he doesn't understand, and Bai explains that the master can relax because he believes that in this month, the master will reach the 9th grade. To provoke him, the blind demon says that starting the next day, Sinning will sleep in the master's bed and stay with him all the time. Although the master doesn't think it's a good idea, Bai explains that her mission is to protect him, and if he reaches the 9th grade, it will reduce her burden. After a quick discussion where Bai asks the master to keep Mo Wang by his side, he says he needs to get ready to travel. As he leaves the master's room, the blind demon hears an angry voice in him. Sinyin complains about the excess work having to read letters and asks what she did to deserve this. Bai teases her by saying she can start writing since the others wouldn't be there. But the girl doesn't calm down, complaining about everyone leaving and her staying behind, asking what she is to them. The blind demon teases her again, calling her a battery capable of replacing 6 batteries, which irritates her even more. During the night, the master asks Sinning to finish the massage early because he needs to rest. But she takes advantage of being alone in the inn and says she needs to stay by his side and will sleep in the same bed as him. She also says that if at least Bai were there, she could worry less. Our protagonist asks if that isn't depressing for her. With that, she starts crying, asking if he wants to avoid sleeping next to her so much and if he hates her that much. The master feels bad about it and says they can sleep together because he doesn't mind. Sinning gets excited and says she will get some clothes for the master to choose what she prefers she wear. She acknowledges that he is not made of stone, and the massages have excited him a lot, and the training leaves him with even more stamina. At that moment, Mo Wang's stone falls in front of the master but feels strong headaches and faints. His partner returns of her black nightgown and imagines that Mo Wang might end up calling her mother when he wakes up. But at that moment, her clothes start to turn into paper, which worries her. The paper is charged with Kyoto surrounds Sinyin until they explode in front of her. Amidst this explosion, a huge hand appears and traps Sinyin. This energy was emanated by Mo Wang's stone that was awakening. Sinyin recognizes her sealed partner while he asks what she wanted him to call her. Guys, that's the end of the video. If you liked this video, please leave a comment in the comment section. Also subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon. Like the video and share it too. Thank you for watching and see you next time again.